And we're back. Greetings, everyone. This is Lucian Vâlsan, broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is Herr Jon Gunnarsson, broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer, James Huff, making sure everything works just fine, broadcasting from the States. Welcome, everyone, to episode number 163. Greetings, Jon.
Good evening. It's good to be back.
Oh, it is good
A
to
lot
be
of stuff
back.
to talk about.
Oh, yeah, a lot of stuff to talk about, and also a lot crappier weather. I mean, I realize that winter is coming and not summer, but still, I mean, it has gotten suddenly very cold, especially during the night. I mean, during the day is still quite acceptable, but during the night, 3 days ago, I was like, "Are you kidding me? -2 Celsius?" I had almost forgotten how that feels like.
Yeah, probably all that warmth went to Germany because actually in the last couple of days it's been getting a lot better here. So we've had a couple of really nice days with like 15, 20 degrees and sunshine and so on. That was quite nice.
Yeah, same thing here during daytime, but during nighttime it's
Oh, okay.
very, very cold, unusually cold. Quite normal during the day, but yeah, during the night is you really have to turn up the heat inside the house if you don't want to catch a cold. Speaking of the climate in Germany, there was the political climate that had a quote-unquote shock, which I don't think it was much of a shock. I mean, we kind of predicted the results more or less. Your favorites, FDP, got more than we expected.
Yeah, basically all the small parties are doing well. And
Except
both,
Die Linke, I think.
yeah, but they actually also won a little bit.
Oh yeah,
So all
okay.
the small parties gained, like the Linke and the Grünen, they just like won like a 0.6% and 0.5%, but FDP and AfD, they really were the big winners. The big losers are the two big parties that are currently in the Grand Coalition. The Union went down by 8.6 percentage points and the SPD by 5.2 percentage points. That's the worst result for the SPD in post-war history. So they're now at just 20.5%, where, like, 10, 15 years ago, they were close to 40% usually.
Yeah,
So they basically
they've
lost like,
never been under 25 since I was born, basically, and started reading on German politics. I don't
yeah,
remember them ever being under 25.
yeah, I mean, for a long time, there were basically just three parties that were in the Bundestag, just the Union, the SPD, and the FDP. And during that time, the two big parties would usually get somewhere around like 40%, and the FDP, something like 7-8%. But now in sort of recent years, the two big parties, and especially the SPD, have been getting smaller and smaller. And now SPD is down to 20.5%, which I'm fairly happy with that.
I would argue it's 20.5 too much, but hey. Or yeah. The Greens have gotten a very fantastic result, much more than I expected, to be honest. I mean, I didn't expect them to get as much as, what was 9%, 8.9, something like that. It was still quite a lot for the Green Party. They usually get this score when there is a lot of people not turning up to the polls, but this wasn't the case now.
Yeah, I think it was actually, I don't exactly know what the turnout was, but it was, I think, somewhere like average, a bit above average.
A bit above average.
Yeah, but as I said, basically the all these small parties are sort of doing well, and the two big parties are not doing well. And sort of I guess the biggest story of the election is the rise of the AfD, which is sort of a right-wing nationalist party that's now made it to the Bundestag, it's actually a very young party. It was founded in 2013, so like 4.5 years ago, and it participated in the Bundestag election last time in 2013, and they got, I think, like 4.7 or 4.8%, so barely missing the 5% threshold you need to get into the Bundestag. And now this election, they've made it. I'm not particularly happy about that, but I don't think it's the end of the world as many people in Germany seem to think.
I'm neither happy nor sad. What I don't understand is why there is so much apocalyptic talk about it, or why is everyone acting like it's a surprise? I mean, everyone, regardless of one's political opinion, it was quite obvious that they will be there and they will be getting more than 10%. This was a done deal. It would have been a shock if they had gotten 30%. Now that would have been a surprise, but 12.7 or 0.6, what they got is really not a surprise, or it shouldn't be.
It is a bit higher than the recent poll suggested, so they did outperform the polls a bit. Actually, wouldn't have been too surprising if they were landed at like 9% or something like that. That was still sort of very much in the cards. Because in sort of recent polls, I think they were around the 10%, maybe slightly above 10%. So like this 12.6% is sort of higher than most people expected, but still nothing too surprising. Basically, everyone expected them to make it into the Bundestag and to have like a decent result, but they did better than most people expect, and I think better than the AfD itself, I think, expected. So it's a bit of a surprise in that regard. But the reason people are shocked is because they think the AfD is a sort of neo-Nazi party that's. I mean, there's something to that. There've been some very questionable comments by some AfD people. One of their two top guys for that election. His name is Gauland. He, for example, in one speech, he said that Germans had a right to be proud of the achievements of their soldiers in 2 world wars. That's a sort of statement where I think, that's not quite kosher, and or that. Talked about one politician who's sort of Turkish descent, but a German citizen, that she should be gotten rid of in Anatolia. That's a sort of statement where you think that's crossing some lines.
Yeah, but I don't think that makes them neo-Nazis. I really don't.
I don't think they're neo-Nazis. I think, but I do think they're definitely sort of flirting with neo-Nazis and trying to attract their votes. But no, that they're not neo-Nazis. It's not like they want to gas the Jews or to reconquer lost territories in East Prussia and so on. Nothing like that. But they are definitely a lot more right-wing than any of the established parties.
Yeah, but then again, the established parties are all on the left. I mean, you said it on this show that there is basically the center and the left. So I think it's more of a question of high sensibilities from way too many people in the German mainstream society. Too much sensibility. They've gotten how do they put it? They gotten accustomed to owning everything and shunning anything to the right of Queen Merkel for so many years that now they're a little bit too uneasy about that. Hold on a second, there is such thing as people who are not particularly fond of the current quote-unquote consensus climate, which is a very Swedish way of thinking and completely alien to these voters. I mean, when it comes to the actual platform, it's basically like the Union was 25 years ago. It's nowhere near anything radical that you would expect if you're reading the Cathedral media.
Yeah, I saw a funny election poster by the AfD that had a picture of Franz Josef Strauß, who was probably the most famous CSU politician. And it said Strauss would vote AfD, and yeah, I think that might be accurate. That might be accurate.
Yeah, that might be accurate. A friend of mine was in Dresden about 2 weeks before the election, and she was like, I haven't seen any electoral poster with the Union or the SPD. Only if FDP and the AFD existed. And then she posted an update about 3 days later. I found one Merkel poster. It was on a dumpster. So I mean, there are definitely areas that are disgruntled with that, and the I guess we could call it the Berlin establishment completely forgot that those people even exist.
Yeah, the AfD did very, very well in the East.
Hmm. Yeah, but again, this is what I really don't understand. That this pretending that everyone is shocked, which they really aren't. I mean, or they shouldn't be. If they are, they're really stupid. And I don't suspect them of stupid. I suspect them of being evil, but I don't suspect them of being stupid. I don't think they should be shocked. The results are pretty much, within the margin of error. Yeah, maybe the FDP got a little bit more than we expected, and the AfD got a little bit more, and maybe SPD got slightly less than we expected, but nothing really spectacular, nothing really radical. Uh, my point is that there has been too much concern and worried talk and for nothing really.
Yeah, but I think also probably the biggest surprise to me in this election is how badly the Union did. They lost 8.6 percentage points. That's a lot, and also that's quite how badly the SPD did. These are, I think, the two most surprising things about this election.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Well, quite frankly, I expected the Union to do bad um, because I know you are of the Queen Merkel, long live the Queen persuasion, and I understand why. But nevertheless, there are a lot of people who are not going to forget the 2015 disaster, and it was expected to see some of that being reflected on the polls this month. Expecting not to happen sounded a little bit optimistic to me.
yeah, I mean that the Union would lose some was quite clear, and that was reflected in the polls. But just how much they lost is very surprising. It's also very surprising how badly the CSU did, which is the sort of
Mm-hmm.
Bavarian branch of the Union. They got, I think, something like 35%, when usually in past elections they got something like 50%
Mm-hmm.
in Bavaria. So they did really poorly. That's quite a surprise.
The way I learned it from people there, it was a frustration that the leadership of the local CSU failed to stand up to Queen Merkel appropriately, and enough supporters thought that that was unacceptable and they needed to be punished in some way. I don't know how true that is, but that's what people who live
Yeah,
there.
I think that's accurate. So unlike the CDU, the CSU is still a conservative party. I described the CDU as a former conservative party.
Yeah.
The CSU is still more or less conservative, and they have been taking a sort of a comparatively more hardline view of the on the migration issue. Whereas so they're sort of like on the migration issue, they're somewhere like in between the CDU and the AfD in terms of their positions.
And they're also more capitalistic than the big umbrella party.
I'm not so sure about that. Maybe.
Right. So the second big news is that the socialists are actually considering opposition. Did I get that right?
The Social Democrats.
Yeah,
Yeah.
SPD.
So Schulz was their the candidate for chancellor. A lot of people sort of were joking that he wasn't actually running for chancellor. He was actually running for vice chancellor, because everyone knows that Merkel is gonna keep her job. It was actually quite kind of surprising to me then that immediately after the election, after the results were in, he went on television and he announced that there would not be a grand coalition, that he would go into the opposition, and he was very firm about that. And I thought that he might not be able to hold on to his job as party leader, but apparently he has so far. And so as it looks right now, that the only possible coalition with the SPD not willing to enter into one is the sort of the so-called Jamaica coalition. So it's black, yellow, and green, like the colors of the Jamaican flag. So it's the Union, that's black. It's the classic liberals of the FDP, which are yellow, and then the Greens. And hammering together that kind of coalition is going to be tough. There's quite strong sort of ideological differences there. The CDU and the Greens would probably be able to get along reasonably well. But in terms of the CSU and the FDP getting along with the Greens, that's going to be difficult.
To put it mildly.
Yeah, to put it mildly, yes. So, I mean, the Greens, they are sort of the classic watermelon party, that they're green on the outside and red on the inside. So not really going to get along particularly well with the more economic liberal positions of the FDP and to a lesser extent the CSU. So, for example, the Greens have declared before the election that one of the criteria they absolutely want to have if they are to enter into any coalition is that there should be a commitment to stop the production and sale of any regular cars burning fossil fuels by 2030 in Germany. And the CSU have already before the election reacted to that and said that they would not enter into any coalition with this kind of agreement. So that's already sort of a sort of knockout criterion if either of those two parties is going to have to fall on that. And their supporters would probably not like that. So it's quite difficult. And also the CSU has they have said in the election that they want to have a maximum number of migrants that can be allowed in a year, and the Greens have said that they absolutely don't want to have that. So that's another sort of another position where it's not really reconcilable, where either of those two parties is going to have to fold. It's going to be quite interesting to see if they work out a coalition, and it's also going to be really interesting to see what happens if they don't manage to do it. Because
the snap election option is on the table, or they'll have to form a minority government.
Yeah, but both are a possibility.
Okay.
Also, the question if it's a minority government, who's going to support them? I mean, the AfD, they can't do that. That would be inconceivable for them. They're not going to vote for Merkel. Maybe the SPD does it. Maybe the Greens do it or something like that. Maybe it's going to be like a black-yellow coalition with the Greens supplying extra votes or something like that, or the SPD or something like that. I don't know. It's going to be tough.
It's going to be fun to watch, and probably, I mean, I've seen some optimistic voices that they'll say, oh, the new cabinet will be a done deal by mid-October, and I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. I really don't think so. It's going to take a lot more than that. It will be quite a surprise if they manage to put everything together in just 2 weeks. Probably not. Right. So with that offered as a context, let's go into our relatively long news section. And the first one is about the Social Democrats.
Yeah, coming from the side, now with women. So now it's up to the women. As Martin Schulz ascends the stage in the Willy Brandt house on Sunday evening to proclaim his party's defeat, he is surrounded by female colleagues. Standing behind the four ministers, Andrea Nahles, Katharina Barley, and Barbara Hendricks, and the prime ministers Manuela Schwesig and Manuel Dreyer, Heiko Maas is barely visible. And Sigmar Gabriel, the former party leader, who many here are blaming for the historically bad result of the SPD, is at the back, practically melding into the blue wall behind him. Opposition rather than grand coalition. Women's power rather than alpha males. Nothing is to remain as it was in the SPD. That is the message of the party leadership's first official appearance. Scholz himself, who failed in his bid for the chancellorship, seems pale but collected. The SPD has lost the federal election, and that was painful, he says with a firm voice. His party would have to, quote, reform itself from the ground up. And he sees it as his job, quote, as the elected chairman, to manage this process. He wanted to continue leading the party, but not to be the chairman of the Bundestag faction, he says a little while later on television. The leadership committees will be in session as early as Monday. Many in the party headquarters are convinced that Andrea Nahles will emerge as the candidate for the factional leadership. The former JUSO chairwoman, that's the youth organization of the SPD, so the former JUSO chairwoman has been a combative labor minister who managed to implement the minimum wage, retirement with the 63, and the restriction of subcontracted labor, thereby also earning the respect of Union politicians. Nahles has long been part of the SPD's leadership team. As leader of the opposition, she would always be the first to respond to Chancellor Merkel in the Bundestag over the next years, thereby recommending herself as a potential next chancellor. According to the younger members of the Bundestag, this generational shift should not stop with Nahles. Quote, the SPD needs to become younger, more female, and more digital, says Lars Klingbeil. Alongside Michelle Müntefering and Manuela Schwesig, this 39-year-old is one of the party's young hopefuls. Quote, my generation now needs to take on more responsibility. And it goes on and on about some sort of more arcane details, which I'm not going to read. So the SPD, they're sort of doubling down on their appeal to women. They've already, pushed through things like the women's quota in for public listed corporations for their boardrooms and things like that, and the sort of law that forces corporations to reveal the pay of their employees in an effort to decrease the wage gap and things like that. And seems like they're sort of doubling down on that. And it seems like they're not really learning.
I don't know if it's a good news or a bad news. On one hand, it's good news because doubling down on the nonsense tends to yield fantastic results for the non-left. On the other hand, doubling down on nonsense like that tends not to be necessarily good for the country in general. Any country. I mean, it's because we see the same process in other countries too. It's just not good for the country when this kind of thing gets pushed more and more.
Yeah, and I mean, the only two non-feminist parties, at least among the six major parties, were also the only two big winners in that election. So the FDP and the AfD, they're not... the FDP, I mean, there's some feminists in the FDP, but overall, they're more sort of based on their liberalism. They're not exactly...
liberalism as understood in Europe and not in America.
Yeah, not the sort of perverted understanding of liberalism that the Americans have. That's like where someone like FDR, who's like the most illiberal president the United States has had, arguably,
is a liberal hero.
A liberal.
Yeah. But yeah, do these people even have political strategists? I mean, in some ways, it just seems that they don't understand practical politics anymore. And the SPD used to be quite astute at that.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing is that there's just market saturation with this sort of appealing to women, appealing to feminist women. Left parties doing that, the Greens are doing that, the SPD is doing that, the Union is doing that to a lesser extent. And I just don't think that's a sort of a topic with which you can win a lot of votes these days.
Mhm. Yeah, in many ways, it's not even to maintain the base. I mean, there are many older leftists who've started voting outside of their traditional voting area precisely because of this. And I'm sure this has happened. I've read on some German forums where people also post in English sometimes, and there were very older leftists. They were like, I voted for the Social Democrats for my entire life. But in 2013, I voted FDP, and I'm going to vote AFD this time, precisely because of this nonsense of doubling down on things that are maybe popular with the tiny Berlin elite or the media elite, but completely irrelevant to the average person in the suburbs or whatever. It's just not a relevant topic. I mean, who cares? The rural farmer in East Germany, does he give a shit whether there's a women's quota? Probably not, and his wife probably doesn't give a shit either.
Yeah, and it's not like people aren't voting for the SPD because there's not enough young women or something like that running for them.
Definitely not. Definitely not the case. Yeah. No. It is really interesting, and it kind of gives credence to the more extreme segments of the internet who say that some of these parties become literally cucked, and here comes Schultz saying we need to become more cucked. I mean, how else would you interpret it without being mean and say, oh, we need to become younger and more female? First of all, why? And second of all, nobody seems to be making the case anymore that whether the why do they, or at least why they think this is a good thing. And I've seen this kind of nonsense pushed in companies as well. Well, somewhat private companies, but not really. They put this kind of nonsense. Oh, we need to become more younger and more female. And I'm like, why? What is the evidence that any organization being younger or more female or both is necessarily better? Because I have yet to see any conclusive evidence to that, or at least debatable evidence.
Yeah, not to say that becoming younger and more female is necessarily bad, but it's just it depends on the specific people you hire, whether they're young or female is not it's not that interesting. It's in a politician you're looking for, are they competent, are they popular, can they run a good campaign, that sort of thing. Whether they're young or whether they're female is very much ancillary to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and in the end, if you're really into that, well, AFD is very young and very female, so there's that. I mean, just saying. I mean, now
is not particularly female.
It's yeah, but it was led by Petri for most of the time, and yeah, there's an entire controversy there that she is dropping either she's dropping the membership or she will not be representing AFD in the parliament. It's a total clusterfuck there. But yeah, I mean, go ahead, please.
Basically, she has not joined the AfD faction in the Bundestag, and she's announced that she's leaving the party. She hasn't done it yet, I think, but she's is going to, because she basically says that the party is drifting too far to the right for her, and that's sort of been the story of the AfD in the last 4.5 years, that they started as a party that I actually really liked, that it was sort of, yeah, it was conservative, but it was also very sort of liberal and some very sound economic policies. And lots of economists were in the party, and they're saying lots of very sensible things. But then, sort of more and more, it drifted to the right. It became more nationalistic, more populistic. And then they got rid of Lucke because he was sort of too liberal, and then now Petri has sort of left. Already before that, she was sort of shunted to the side a bit. She wasn't running as one of the Spitzenkandidaten for AfD. There was Gauland, and what is the woman's name? I forgot, but they've got some sort of affirmative action hiree as to run alongside Gauland. So they got this young lesbian woman to say that here, look at us people. We're definitely not bigots. We've even got a lesbian running for us.
Alice Weidel.
Yeah, exactly. Alice Weidel. Yeah. So so from there, Peter is now leaving because she sort of thinks it's becoming sort of too nationalistic, too sort of right wing. And where the party is going to be in 4 years, nobody knows really. That's sort of the argument that I can sort of understand why people are worried about the AfD. But it might well be that there might be a neo-Nazi party in 4 years, but they're not right now. So I don't know.
Right. All right. Enough with politics. Oh my God, 30 minutes on that. More than enough. We're probably not going to speak German politics. Yeah, who am I kidding? We're going to speak German politics in the next episode as well. But yeah, enough with that. Let's go to the science. As I said in the description of the show, there's the science, then there's justice, and then there's the silly place. And sometimes we can't really make the difference where the science ends and the silly place begins. But anyway, next one coming from FlandersToday.eu. For those who don't know, Flanders is a Dutch-speaking area of Belgium. Ethics Committee rules against infant circumcision. The federal government's Committee for Bioethics has ruled against the circumcision of infant boys for reasons other than medical necessity. Its ruling states that bodily integrity is more important than religious faith. The committee was ruling on a question posed in 2014 by Brussels doctors who asked whether carrying out ritual circumcision on infant boys was ethically correct. The process is irreversible, has no medical justification in most cases, and is performed on minors unable to give their own permission. The committee has taken 3 years to give its ruling, it said, because of the religious and cultural importance of the question. We're dealing with a very difficult question, says Paul Schootsmans of the University of Leuven on behalf of the committee. On the one hand, you have the freedom of religion, which means a parent is allowed to have their son circumcised for religious reasons. On the other hand, he said, is the child's right to physical integrity, which is protected by the International Treaty on the Rights of the Child, and in particular, its protection from physical injury. As circumcision is irreversible and therefore a radical operation, we find the physical integrity of the child takes precedence over the belief system of the parents, the committee chair Marie-Geneviève Pinson pronounced. So, good, I guess. I mean, baby steps.
Yeah, all I have to say is bravo. I'm generally not a particularly big fan of these kinds of committees, but I guess in this case, they're right. So,
these kinds of committees tend to suck, but then again, we have to take it on an issue by issue. Sometimes these kinds of committees are our enemies, and it's our job to undermine them. Sometimes they're not. And on the issue of circumcision, we have to say that every single time this kind of question was posed to any ethics committee in any country in Europe, the answer was always the same. I mean, at the very least, they've been very consistent on this. And from a practical politics perspective, it just gives more ammunition to those of us who believe that mutilating the genitals of infant children is just not a good idea.
Yeah.
Right. Let's go to the next one. Just keep this article in mind. And next time you argue against with pro-mutilation individuals, just drop this one out there. The next one is, wow, is it science or is it silly place or is it both? Please.
From Telegraph, from the UK. Boys are better at physics because they learn about projection while going to the toilet, researchers say. Boys are better at physics because they learn about projection while going to the toilet, researchers have claimed. From a young age, boys are taught about how to aim accurately so that they do not make a mess in the bathroom, and this gives them a better understanding of projectile motion, according to 3 academics. Writing for Times Education Supplements, TES, Anna Vâlsan of Abertay University, along with Kate Vâlsan and David Lowe of the University of New South Wales, Canberra, explained their theory. Quote, playful urination practices, from seeing how high you can pee to games such as Pee-Ball, where men compete using their urine to destroy a ball placed in the urinal, may give boys an advantage over girls when it comes to physics, the academics wrote. The researchers said they have examined gender differences in achievement on physics tests and found that girls generally perform worse than boys, but with a more marked gap in specific topic areas. Quote, in particular, the largest gaps in performance between girls and boys arise in questions that involve projectile motion, things that have been thrown, kicked, fired, etc., they said. On some projectile questions, we've seen only around 1/3 of girls answer correctly compared to 2/3 of boys. This is not a trivial gap in performance, particularly when a diagnostic test may contain several questions on projectiles. They said this is significant since the physics curriculum often uses projectile motion as a starting point for more sophisticated mechanics concepts such as force, energy, and momentum. This is even done because it is assumed to be more familiar and hence easier to relate to, they said. The researchers concluded that there is, quote, no simple way to provide girls with the same opportunities for exploring projectile motion that boys have. They suggested instead that the school physics syllabus could be constructed in a different way so that it does not begin with projectile motion. Other topics, such as energy conservation, which is more central to physics, could be taught first instead, they said.
Oh boy. Where do we start?
Now, this is very silly, but it's maybe there's something to that argument.
Yeah, let's start from the presumption that there is something to that argument. Yes, so I mean that's basically the first reaction. Let's assume everything is true. Yeah, so what? I don't think this is a good argument to then sorry, I don't think it is a good starting point to then argue for more changing in the school curricula. I mean, hasn't the school curricula already been made not just girl friendly but explicitly anti-boy already for the last 20 or 30 years? I mean, how much more does it have to get?
Yeah. But what I would take issue with this study is that they don't really provide any sort of supporting evidence for their theory. So they say that there's this difference in how well boys and girls understand projectile motion, and they give like one possible explanation for that, but they don't explore any other explanations. So like one sort of test you could do is to look at boys who've been brought up in a household where they've been taught to sit down when peeing.
Yeah.
And this way, I mean, I guess you can still sort of explore projectile motion when you're sitting down to some extent, but not as much as if you're standing. So maybe they could try to compare boys who've been sort of taught to sit down with regular boys and see how well they do on projectile motion. And if there's a significant gap there, then I would be willing to accept this hypothesis as being quite likely.
Yes, and then there is the issue of compare children of any sex who grew up in a place where they had a backyard and they could experiment outside, versus children of any sex who were brought up in a small apartment where they did not have that same opportunity. Because at the end of the day, rural children get a lot more exposure to throw things around, fire things around, kick things around in open space than children of lower middle class urban dwellings, basically, who have much less opportunity to do so. And maybe there is a gap there. If there isn't, why there isn't? I mean, there's so many other questions. If you really want to investigate whether there is something in upbringing that changes that gap, which I don't think there is, to be perfectly honest. But if there is, there are a lot more questions to ask than to just say, oh yeah, because boys pee while standing. Yeah, please, no, that's just silly.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of the obvious alternative explanation if you want to have a sort of nurture type of explanation is that boys know more about projectile motion because they practice throwing things and kicking things in various sports and games that boys tend to play and that girls don't play as much of.
Mhm.
So that's something that should definitely be explored. And of course, as he said, it might well be just something that's due to biology.
Yeah. But then again, if they're really interested interested into that, they should at the very least, if this is the assumption, well, boys experiment with projectile motion and whatnot a lot more than girls. Fine, then let's explore all the avenues where that may occur. Peeing is just not enough. It just sounds like a very thin explanation. And again, as you said, they didn't even properly compare it to at the very least have a solid argument for the hypothesis. Um, but again, I mean, in my experience, um, kids who would usually go to school after they had gone to their parents, or sorry, their grandparents, who usually lived in the rural areas, had a much easier way of relating to all of these practical applications of physics than kids who were brought up in an apartment, basically. Even if it was a big apartment, they had fewer opportunities to do these kinds of experimentations in open space. And I presume this kind of applies pretty much everywhere. It's just it is a lot more of a straightforward explanation that doesn't require this kind of magical thinking. Oh my God, we aim in the ball and come on, please. It's just too much of a magical thinking in there.
Okay.
Right. Let's go to the next one. Okay, the next one is quite infuriating to be honest, although in a way funny. Anyway, coming from the British Brainwash Corporation, Bath Spa University blocks transgender research. A therapist says he's astonished by a university's decision to stop him studying people who decide to reverse gender reassignment operations. James Caspian wanted to write a thesis on detransition as part of his master's degree in counseling and psychotherapy at Bath Spa University. He said it was rejected by the university's ethics committee because it could be politically incorrect. The university said it couldn't comment until after an internal investigation. Mr. Caspian, a counselor who specializes in therapy for transgender people, told Radio 4, I was astonished at that decision. I think that the university exists to encourage discussion, research, dissent, even challenging perhaps ideas that are out of date or not particularly useful. He says he wanted to study people who had swapped gender and then changed their minds after coming across evidence of a growing number of people who regretted having the surgery and finding no research had been done into the subject. The university, formerly known as Bath College of Higher Education before gaining full university status in 2005, initially accepted his proposal but struggled to find people willing to take part. He said, quote, I find it very difficult to get people willing to talk openly about the experience of reversing surgery. They said that they felt too traumatized to talk about it, which made me think we really need to do the research even more. He amended his proposal to include people who had transitioned to men and reverted to living as women but without reversing their surgery and resubmitted it, but it was rejected by the ethics committee. The fundamental reason given was that it might cause criticism of the research on social media, and criticism of the research would be criticism of the university, and they also added that it was better not to offend people, he said. According to the Times, it was rejected because engaging in a potentially politically incorrect piece of research carries a risk to the university, close quote. American tranny activist Ricky Wilchins said studies on trannies could have a political undercurrent and potentially have a negative effect on the way they are treated. People have been launching studies that undercut trannies' access to surgery for decades now, he told Radio 4. But Mr. Caspian said older studies were out of date and the research was necessary to help people. He added, the whole field has completely changed over the last few years. The idea that we might use the information from the research I was going to do in a way that wouldn't help people is completely wrong. He is considering a legal challenge, but is waiting for the university to conclude an internal investigation. So, here's the tranny lobby again. It is not the first time, and I suspect it won't be the last time. I suspect that the next advancement, at least at first, the next serious advancement into how to deal with this disease, with this mental disorder, will have to come from South Korea or Japan, which are one of the few places on earth where you can actually study whatever the hell you want without having the lynch mob at your door.
Yeah, and things like that are why political correctness is cancer.
Yeah, clearly.
Because, I mean, this person just can't get any sort of funding for some research that seems to be urgently needed. I mean, it's apparently a completely understudied field, so that seems to be where research would be most urgently needed, but also where you can't do research because it might reflect poorly on the university, and maybe it might cost the university some funding if this gets brought up on social media, and maybe some donors don't want to associate with the university.
Yeah, pure cancer.
When these kinds of controversy is precisely what should be studied in the university.
The thing is that they're looking at it. I mean, I do blame them for their lack of spine, but their argument is pretty sound in the sense that in the current year, there are a few undeniable truths that you're not supposed to say in public, such as the fact that the vast majority of teenagers who present some symptoms of gender confusion, they naturally grow out of it once they experience puberty. This is an undeniable truth. Reflected in multiple studies all over the world. It's just not a question. Every single researcher and scientist worth his salt on this topic will acknowledge it. But you're not allowed to say it in public, because if you say it, that means you're hurting the feelings of the Tumblr feminists and the Tumblr trannies and all the other, the rest of the LGBTist clique. And that makes you suddenly a homophobe and a transphobe and a bigot and a hater, which I guess to some people that's a serious concern to take. It's not for me. I mean, I'm like, yeah, okay, fine, I'm a bigot, but this doesn't change the fact that it's true. But I guess most people don't think like me, which is sad. But so this is one thing. The second thing is that there is an ethical question that nobody dares to ask on whether it is appropriate to provide chemical treatment to, especially to teenagers, or how to deal with those who regret it, those who later on in life go through the quote-unquote process of transition and then figure out that, hold on a second, this was a bad idea. There is nothing for them. There is something for them in Norway, for those who have been subjected to it against their will, namely the in the 80s, you know, then there was still the John Money ideology that children with the unknown sex, basically, you know, hermaphrodites and so on, should be a priori raised as girls. And as it turns out, that's really a bad idea. But there are still many surviving victims of that practice in the 80s and late 70s. And there is something for those in available in Norway. But for those who at least apparently voluntarily submitted themselves to this, there is no support network for them, either private or state provided. And that's because there is no research. Nobody knows what to do with them. And the tranny lobby is the first one to throw them under the bus. They call them bigots and haters and transphobes and whatnot. I mean, there is a website, I think it's called Sex Change Regret, something like that, with a guy who was a tranny for a while. And then he reversed back to living as his natural sex because he figured out that's a bad idea. And because he's religious, nobody wants to even listen his arguments from his experience. Forget about the religion bollocks. But no, the arguments from his experience, nobody wants to listen to them because he's deemed a priori a religious bigot, even though he really isn't. And nobody wants to listen to that. Nobody wants to research on that. And the so-called LGBT lobby that is allegedly having the best interests of the queers and trannies and whatnot at their heart, they're the first one to throw them under the bus.
Yeah, and these are some of the most vulnerable people around.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to go with the sort of Milo Yiannopoulos type of argument that sooner or later, maybe 20, maybe 30, maybe 40 years ago, 40 years from now, but at some point in time, we're going to have to look back to what we're doing now to vulnerable teenagers and vulnerable young adults. And we're going to look back and say, how the hell could we be that barbaric? Because for all intents and purposes, the more evidence piles up, the whole sex change thing is just really not that efficient. It's just not. Sure, there are individual cases where they're happy, but overall, not so much. Not so much. And nobody wants to do that. And from the tranny lobby's perspective, it makes sense because they know that if more research will be conducted, eventually there will come the topic will come up on whether the current what do they call it? Gender affirmative treatment. That's what they call it. A very Orwellian name. Sometimes at one moment, after so much research will be conducted or will have been conducted, the topic will come up on whether the current accepted quote-unquote treatment is really a good idea. And most of the people, regardless on which side of the issue they are standing on, they suspect it isn't. And it's really sad. I mean, basically, they're investing, they have an ideological investment into a current practice that may not even be good. That may not even help the people that they claim that they want to help. And nobody's, I mean, I have never been able to at least get my argument across. I don't expect anyone to agree with me, but I do expect individuals who claim to be for queer people, for trannies, and so on. At least I do expect them to at least understand that when people like me make this kind of argument, it is precisely out of compassion and not out of hatred. I want more people to kill themselves. And the current methods, they actually don't curb the immense suicide rate. They don't do anything to actually help. And more appeasement and more suppression of dissenting research is actually making things worse, or at the very least maintains the status quo, which is already a very bad status quo. It doesn't help anyone.
Yeah, I guess the argument that they would make is that the high suicide rate after transition is because of the harmful societal perception of transgender people, and because of that, there's sort of bigotry against them, and that is why there's this high suicide rate. And yeah, maybe that's part of it, but it's sort of an unfalsifiable claim.
Yeah, but this doesn't explain why the suicide rate post-op trannies is essentially the same in Sweden and Iran. I mean, sure, you can argue that there's I mean, it's quite foolish to say that, oh, there's exactly the same type of and same amount of bigotry in Sweden as it is in Iran. Sorry, I'm not buying that. I mean, in Iran, you might actually end up being hanged on a crane. So no, I think it's a lot more bigotry in Iran than in Sweden. Yet the suicide rate in post-op trannies is the same. Because, by the way, in Iran, sex change operations are paid for by the state. So in that regard, Iran is a very progressive country. Now, admittedly, they use Islamic reasoning. I'm sorry for the oxymoron there. Islamic and reasoning is anyway, but they use the Quran to justify it. But it doesn't really matter. The thing is that when it comes to suicide, it's just the same, or essentially the same. Sometimes a little bit more in Iran, sometimes a little bit less. But
can I break in here just for a moment?
Please
concerning Iran, if I'm not mistaken, homosexuality is a no-go there.
Yes.
Yep.
And so if they catch you, then they'll give you a choice. You can get the sex change, or you can die.
Not really. It's a little bit more complicated than that, because essentially that choice is not offered. And also, from what I've learned, I've met a few Iranians who are dissenters and who live in Armenia when I was in this tour. And I asked them about these kinds of things. And they were like, they told me essentially what Ali Mehrashpan always says when we get him on these shows or when he writes in English, that usually homosexuality is used as an aggravating circumstance over an already more mainstream crime. So basically, if you're a thief, if you happen to be a homosexual thief, then you definitely die. So it's rarely the case. I'm not saying it never happens, but it's rarely the case that someone is prosecuted exclusively because one is homosexual. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. Now, it's far from me from wanting to defend the Islamic Republic of Iran, but I'm just saying that it's not like that. No, it's not like that. Oh, they catch you for being a fag and suddenly you get the choice of whether to become the opposite sex or you die. It's not like that. But then again, in a few years, I'm going there and I'm going to ask the questions from on the field. So I might even get more clarifications then on that.
Okay.
But again, this still doesn't change the fact. Okay, but even if it were, as James insinuated, that would still mean that there should be more suicide rate in Iran than in Sweden, and yet there isn't.
Yeah.
So, in the end, these kinds of suppression of research is just cancer. And it's just, it may sound good, it may make trans activists feel good, but in the end, it's actually less compassionate than my quote-unquote transphobic approach, which is basically just, let's ask the questions, let's see where the research goes. I'm not even saying that this guy's research would have been fantastic. Maybe it would have been crap. But if we don't ask the questions, how the hell are we going to find the answers?
Yeah, it's just this very, very dangerous attitude that you can't do research because that research might possibly turn out facts that, if they became more widely known, might have negative effects. If you use that kind of reasoning, then you can't do any sort of research on anything, pretty much.
Yeah, all innovation should be banned because of that. I mean, many innovations end up being used badly, depends on the point of view. So yeah, it's basically the same argument as for permissionless innovation. There should be permissionless research. All research is a priori permitted, and then we'll deal with the effects should they become unbearable.
Yeah.
And again, and one last thing, and then we can move to the next story. This particular argument from the tranny activist from the United States, people have been launching studies that undercut transgender people's access to surgery for decades now. I'm sorry, but meanwhile, sex change surgery is a choice and not a right. And you don't have an unalienable right to access to that, especially not on the taxpayers' money. I'm sorry if that's offensive, but you really don't. Yeah. And if someone decides not to do it to you, not to provide that service to you, you don't have the right to force that person to do it. And again, there's always Thailand. They'll do it for the right amount of money, and Serbia, for that matter. Go there. Sure, it's expensive, but then again, you don't have an unalienable. This is another aspect that doesn't bring me new friends in the LGBT lobby when I say, look, it's not your unalienable right to get these things. It's a service. Just like you don't have an unalienable right to a laptop or to cigarettes or to a lighter. It's just not. It's a service, a product.
Yeah, and just like you don't have an unalienable right to get some sort of, I don't know, nose job because you think your nose is ugly or something like that.
Yeah. Precisely, yes. Precisely. Or boob job. Same thing.
And yeah, I mean, if you're ugly, it's not fair that you're ugly, but still, it doesn't mean that that being ugly gives you the right to demand from society resources to get some sort of operations to improve your appearance.
Yeah, precisely. All right, let's go to the justice sector.
Okay, coming from the Telegraph from the UK. Student jailed for falsely accusing taxi driver of sexual assault when he refused to accept her kebab-soaked cash. A criminology student has been jailed after falsely claiming a taxi driver sexually assaulted her after he refused to accept a £10 note covered in kebab oil. Sophie Poynton, 22, told police officers she had been molested in the back of the cab she had been picked up in after a night out. The student rang police in the early hours of April 22 this year, then continued to lie by signing a statement giving an account of the attack in Leeds, West Yorks. Leeds Crown Court heard the driver, a father of 5, was tracked down and kept in custody for 6 hours. He was also unable to work for 4 hours as a result of the claim. Kate BC, prosecuting, said the driver was interviewed and said he could recall Poynton being extremely drunk when she got into his car holding a kebab. He said Poynton threw a £10 note at him when they reached the Hyde Park area, but he refused to accept it as it was covered in oil from the kebab. The driver said Poynton then became abusive and ran around the car opening doors. The prosecutor said he did not think much of it at the time because such incidents with people who are intoxicated are not unusual. A recording of the conversation between the driver and a phone operator at his taxi office supported his account. The court heard a GPS tracker fitted to the car also revealed Poynton's description of the taxi journey to be untrue. Poynton broke down in tears and asked if she could drop the charges when her account was challenged by the police. She pleaded guilty to perverting the course of justice. Denise Breen Lawton, mitigating, said Poynton of Manchester had been studying in Leeds at the time. She said her hopes of becoming a police officer were now ruined. She was jailed for 16 months. Judge Christopher Batty told her, "Your malicious complaint has done a huge disservice to those seeking justice through the police and courts." The driver described in a statement how the false allegation had caused him to suffer from stress.
Good, I guess. The funny part is that she burst into tears and asked whether she could withdraw the charges. Well, now that they have been successfully challenged, this shows to me that these kinds of cases do undermine the feminist case that the even when women lie about rape, they definitely have a serious reason. When in reality, that's really not the case. Most of the time, it's just because. And sometimes I simply cannot understand. I mean, at least I can understand when it's cases like, there is a young girl, usually minor, 16, 17, maybe 15, lying about it to cover for something else, like, I don't know, she went drinking with her friends or whatnot. At least I can understand the reason. But in some cases, it's just completely sociopathic. Like in this case, he's not going to take my kebab soaked 10-pound note. Yeah, I'm going to lie about being raped. Why? I mean, it's just, why?
I guess this person is just a vindictive bitch.
Yeah, that's a fair description, I guess. And the more these kinds of cases come to light, and thank goodness the Cathedral media has been quite an ally to our cause in the last several years, because they've been publishing more and more about this lately. I mean, if you look pre-2012, for instance, or pre-2011, there were such cases reported in the media, but much fewer. In the last 5 or 6 years, they've been publishing them a lot more. And now again, as I always say, which came first, the chicken or the salmonella? Is it really necessarily a growth, or just a growth in reporting by the media? But for the purposes of changing the culture, I don't think it really matters. If it's just an increase in reporting, or if it's necessarily a de facto increase. Because in the end, if we change the public perception that, from the women rarely, if ever, lie about rape, to women actually do lie about rape, and it's not really that uncommon. If we manage to make that shift into the public perception, that would be already fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So this was a good news from the justice sector. Now coming with the bad news. Jon keeps insisting that we read already the case on this. I genuinely don't remember, and I don't have the time to look up in the archives. But anyway, if we did, definitely there wasn't an official sentence pronounced at the time. So, coming from the Telegraph, Lavinia Woodward, Oxford student, too bright for prison, is spared jail for stabbing boyfriend. An Oxford medical student, too bright to be given a prison sentence, has been allowed to walk free from court despite the judge acknowledging that she broke her bail conditions. Lavinia Woodward, 24, who stabbed her Cambridge University boyfriend in the leg with a bread knife, was spared jail yesterday as she was commended for her strong and unwavering determination to address her drug addiction. As she left the courtroom, Woodward was seen mouthing the words "thank you" to the judge as she was ushered out of the dock in tears by her family. The decision was last night criticized by criminal justice campaigners who said that the lenient ruling would deter men who had fallen victim to domestic abuse from coming forward. It comes 4 months after Judge Ian Pringle QC described Woodward as an aspiring heart surgeon as an extraordinarily able young lady whose talents meant that a prison sentence would be too severe. Oh yeah, I do remember now. So basically, at that time, she was given a bail, and she was given some conditions which she broke. One of the conditions was never to contact her victim, which she did, and then some other things. And she broke the bail conditions, and she should have been sent to jail. And another judge, white knighted as the previous judge, said, no, she's too cute to go to jail. So anyway, yeah, I do remember now. Yeah, we covered this one. So I'm going to skip the descriptions of what she did. Resuming procedures at Oxford Crown Court yesterday afternoon, Judge Pringle said that there had been many mitigating features in the case, as he handed the Woodward a 10-month jail sentence suspended for 18 months. His comments was followed, pleased by Woodward's legal counsel that she had been given a conditional discharge due to her unique vulnerability, remorse, and good character. The court also heard that Woodward had been fired from a new job at a shop in London 48 hours after being hired when she was recognized by her customers. This is great. Mr. Sturman, who said that her notoriety was such that she can't even go to a nightclub in London because she's so recognizable. Good. He added that she had undergone a sea change since starving off drugs and was now a different woman. I don't believe that for a second. And despite breaking her bail conditions by texting her victim, Woodward was praised by Judge Pringle for confessing her guilt and deep sorrow for her actions, which I don't believe. Let's skip the disgusting white knighting from the judge. However, the ruling is likely to reignite the row provoked by Judge Pringle's earlier comments in the case, with race and equality activists last night claiming that Woodward's class and social standing may have played a part in her sentence. John Asa, chief executive of the Kingston Race and Inequalities Council, said, quote, I always struggle with how the services legislate justice when it comes to black and minority ethnic and white people. If she wasn't Oxford educated, if she came from a deprived area, I don't think she would have got the same sentence and been allowed to walk free. Echoing his comments, Mark Brooks, chair of the charity Mankind Initiative, said, quote, in terms of whether the genders were reversed, we would expect any man committing this type of crime to go to prison, and rightly so. Last night, the Dean of Christchurch, the very Reverend Professor Martin Percy, said it remained uncertain as to whether Woodward would be allowed to return to complete her studies. We are concerned for the welfare of our students, and it is clearly a matter of regret and sadness when any young person blights a promising career by committing a crime. Ms. Woodward is not currently studying at Oxford, having voluntarily suspended her medical studies. The question of her future will now be decided by the university, which has procedures in place when a student is the subject of a criminal conviction. However, her legal representative said that Woodward's fears of being recognized or returning to Oxford had forced her to consider pursuing a PhD or research role abroad. He added that her reluctance to return was a tragedy. So,
the poor dear.
poor dear. Yeah, I mean, can't women just, randomly stab men in the leg and endanger their lives anymore? What kind of world is this? I mean, this is terrible. I mean, come on. She'll just have to take a ferry to France or the plane to Germany now. So if she wants to continue her PhD, a tragedy indeed.
Yeah, but
Oh
I mean,
God.
in fairness, there were many mitigating factors here that, I mean, after all, her boyfriend talked to her mother about her drinking problem. Obviously, he's a terrible person and deserved to be stabbed pretty much. So,
Yeah, absolutely. In all seriousness, though, I like the way thing is reported. First of all, we finally have the press automatically going to places like Mankind Initiative to ask for comments for this, which wasn't the case even 1 year ago. And this has become quite common lately. I mean, I've seen the New York Times now asking comments from us, from A Voice for Men, when it was on the James Damore issue. I mean, it has gotten quite a common practice lately in the last year or maybe last 18 months. When more and more often when these kinds of cases occur, suddenly the press no longer just asks the comments from um, more established activist groups. They started asking to us, which is, I guess, in a way, step forward. In another way, not really, because unless we differentiate very fast, which we already did, which is great, but not fast enough, we might end up being in the same bucket with those people, and that's something I don't like. But still, I mean, finally, they're starting to ask the correct questions. So would the things have happened the same if it had been a man? This wasn't really common. It was common in the comment sections, but in the articles, it wasn't really common to ask these kinds of questions.
yeah, and I mean, I've seen like a couple of years ago a piece by The Onion, where they asked that this hypothetical case of a young woman committing some sort of particularly heinous crime, and then they said, due to the severity of the crime, this woman is will be tried as a black man, and so the politically correct part is sort of the black, because people acknowledge that black people tend to be convicted more often than white people in the United States. But what they did get right then, that old onion pieces that that man part is very important. It's actually more important than the black
Yeah.
part.
Yeah, far more important. In I don't know. I mean, on one, I hate to agree with these. The Kingston Race and Inequalities Council. I usually think those people deserve free helicopter rides, but in a way, I have to agree with them, especially their second commentary. If she wasn't Oxford educated and came from a deprived area, I don't think she would have gotten the same sentence and be allowed to allowed to walk free. I think that's true.
Yep.
I don't think it has anything to do with her being white, but it does have quite a lot with her being cute, being a woman, and being relatively, well, not necessarily rich, but wealthy, relatively wealthy, uh, and coming from a decent, maybe class, or at least a decent club, for sure. Um, I think if it had been a white boy from a working class neighborhood, I don't think he would have gotten the same sentence, not even by a long shot.
Yep.
Right,
And even
especially
if it was a white girl from a working class background, she probably also wouldn't have gotten away with that.
yeah, probably not, or if she would have gotten a smaller sentence, but she would have gone to jail at least for 1 or 2 months for sure.
Yep.
Yeah. The thing is that white men, we read about that in Britain. They're the most hated demographic these days. Nobody seems to be concerned about this huge crisis, beyond reasonable doubt proven crisis of bigotry. Uh, Everyone is concerned when someone's asking, well, maybe there are too many Sharia courts in the country, then you're suddenly Islamophobic and there is an extremist disruption order issued in your name and you could be arrested for quoting the Bible in public, or even worse, quoting the Quran or quoting Churchill, as has happened. But, a significant chunk of the British society literally hates white men, especially young white men, and that's suddenly not an issue. Amazing. Speaking of that, next one also from the justice sector, also from the Telegraph, former university challenge contestant cleared of rape. A university challenge contestant broke down in tears yesterday as he was cleared of raping a student at York University. Bartholomew Joly de Lotbinière, 22, was found not guilty of rape and assault by penetration by a jury following a 17-month ordeal culminating at a retrial at Bradford Crown Court. The defendant, who was studying at York during the time of the incident, before moving to London last year to study at UCL, wiped tears with a handkerchief, I guess, as he was cleared of the charges. His family, who has been present throughout the trial, also shouted out in relief as the verdict was read out. Mr. Joly de Lotbinière, a historian who appeared at the popular quiz show in 2015, had been forced to endure a second trial after a jury failed to reach a verdict in February. He was charged with rape in May 2016. During his trial, he told the court that the incident, which took place at York University in 2014, had been a consensual sexual encounter with a fellow student. However, he added that it had been embarrassing due to his failure to perform. The woman, now 22, only reported Mr. Joly de Lotbinière when she saw him starring in a television program the following year. She claimed that she had seen a tweet by TV personality Richard Osman about the defendant's long-winded name and had become angry and upset. He told the court how he and the woman had been part of a group that had been socializing in the city and had returned home to her halls of residence in the early hours, where they began kissing. Mr. Joly de Lotbinière added that when they began having sex, he struggled to get an erection and the pair had made a mutual agreement to stop. There was no point going any further. We both just agreed to stop. I think she said just like that, let's just stop, he continued. He said that he tried to portray himself to the woman as someone confident with holding a one-night stand, but when in fact he was inexperienced and uncomfortable with the fling. He denied that the woman had never tried to push him off or show any signs of distress, but added that he had left her halls feeling embarrassed and later sent her a message saying that he had done a very stupid thing. The jury of 7 women and 5 men took 6 hours to find him not guilty. Yeah. These are the kinds of cases where I think the accuser should be punished in some way, shape, or form. I just really do.
Yeah, definitely. And
because this is being a vindictive bitch. I mean, you don't say anything then, and then you see that he's now a star in a TV program, and suddenly you're like, oh, no, that's not acceptable. and you ruin his career, his educational career, and possibly his TV career, if there was any. I have no idea what that program is. I don't even care. And then, 17 months of this ordeal, nobody is going to give this guy the time back that he lost for this ordeal, or the stress, or the health bills that he will eventually incur from the stress endured in the last 17 months. Because, most people are not sociopathic assholes like I am. Because, when someone tells me that, oh, yeah, I'm going to sue you in a criminal court, I'm like, yeah, go ahead, please. Some people do withstand these kinds of things better, but most people don't. For most people, this is scary, and this is stress inducing. Nobody's going to pay for that, and that's the most infuriating part.
Yeah, and that's just one of the big problems with the criminal justice system, that you can just be sort of very, very, very seriously inconvenienced for many months, and even if you found not guilty at the end, you still lost months of your life that you dedicated just fighting these false charges.
Yeah, the trial is the punishment in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know what the solution is, but actually, I don't think there is a solution, because solutions don't exist. But there should be a way, and I think that it can be developed a way, at least in very obvious cases like this one, to at least incur some punishment on the accuser. Because I do realize that in some cases, when false allegations of rape occur, it's usually not necessarily the accuser's fault, like, I don't know, misidentification and things like that. I can really understand in those cases that you're just going to have to say, well, tough shit, c'est la vie, it just happens. But this is a case where it's not the case, where it's not that situation. In this situation, it's not just happens, it's vindictive bitchiness. And in these cases, there should be some consequences.
And I mean, we don't know whether there's going to be some sort of follow-up case where she's going to be tried. I mean, this was his trial, and he's been found not guilty. And then, based on that, maybe there's going to be maybe she is going to be indicted and prosecuted.
True. I doubt this will be the case, but I really hope that I'll be proven wrong.
Yeah.
All right, now let's go to more happy stuff. Oh God, let's go to the silly place. Please take it away.
Okay, coming from the Daily Star, brothels dumping prostitutes in favor of sex robots as latest model moans. Austria has been gripped by sex robots since it was revealed that a bot named Fanny was more popular at a brothel in the capital, Vienna, than the actual prostitutes. And after research revealed a third of us would happily have sex with a robot, and 40% would not consider they were cheating on their partner, the bots are growing in popularity more than ever before. Since then, a growing number of Austrian brothels have been making a switch to include sex robots, and now a bot named Samantha is causing quite the stir. The sex robot reacts to touch, speaks multiple languages, and is even said to be able to learn new things thanks to artificial intelligence, AI software. Samantha approaches visitors at the Electronics Festival, where it is currently being exhibited, by asking, "How are you?" and is even seen looking people deep in their eyes or handing out hugs. It even reacts when someone massages her breasts and moans. Dr. Sergi Santos, who runs the company Cynthia Amatis, based in the Spanish city of Barcelona, is the man behind the development of Samantha. He explained that through her AI, Samantha can remember individual people as she communicates according to the way she was treated by them before. Santos said, in addition, Samantha will get an orgasm even more at a higher sex frequency. The hype does not stop there, as Austrian media are now reporting that an interactive silicon sex doll has become the star attraction at the Ars Electronica Festival in the city of Linz. After months of fine-tuning, customers can buy their very own sex robot who, quote, likes to be touched and can anticipate when you're about to ejaculate. In the coming months, Dr. Santos is planning to sell his very human sex robots in adult shops worldwide. To produce his fembot on an industrial scale, he teamed up with a Chinese sex doll and robotics factory that will allow him to make, quote, a minimum of 50 a week. Daily Star Online revealed pictures from inside the factory in the southern Chinese city of Guangzhou, where Dr. Santos' handcrafted sex bots are made with incredible attention to detail. Psychologist Gertie Sanger explains why some men are more interested in sleeping with sex robots, such as Fanny and Samantha, instead of a real woman. Sanger said, "First, the man can do anything with a doll. Second, every intention is turned off, which can be a factor with a prostitute."
Samantha and Fanny. I mean, the jokes just write themselves. By the way, follow up and update to this. I mean, this article is from September the 12th or 13th, something like that. It says there that the doll has become a star attraction at the Ars Electronica Festival in Linz. Actually, Samantha got broken at that festival because everyone wanted to massage their boobs. And now poor Mr. Santos has to fix her, and it turns out that it's not an easy job to fix the bot's broken tits. On a more serious note, the reason we're gonna probably have more and more. We already had a few sex doll related news in the past, such as the prostitutes in Barcelona who went on a strike and called the police on a brothel that was only dealing with sex bots and no humans. And this will happen more and more often. So sex bots is definitely going to be a topic in the next period on this show and of course on my channel. But briefly, feminists are entirely against this. I mean, the sex positive feminists are against it from, as we said, the sexual trade union perspective, because the sex bots are taking the jobs to real whores, I guess.
They took our jobs.
They took our jobs. They took your jobs. And the sex negative feminists are against it. The sex negative feminists, I would have expecting them to be for this, because men eventually will not oppress women and will not incentivize what they think as an exploitative market of the sex work. But no, the sex negative feminists are also against it because apparently men rape sex bots or something like that. Amazing. You can't win with these people.
Or maybe the explanation is that they just don't like men and they don't like anything that gives men pleasure.
Yeah, sure. They don't. As we'll see in the next one, and most people have already started figuring this out, which is a much better position we're in now than we were 5 years ago. Most people have started to associate instinctively when they hear feminism. Oh, so yeah, these are the bitches that hate men, which is great. This is something that should be preached even more. But yeah, it's really weird why all feminists, even feminists who actually disagree with each other, they're suddenly almost uniformly against this. It's just weird in a way. And as you said, it's really not a question of ideology. They just don't like men.
Yep.
All right. Next one, also from the Silly Place. This one is very long, but I want to read it entirely because it's just so many feminist tears in the end, and we have to drink them. So, yeah, I'm having trouble with my voice, but I really need to read this one. Coming from the Daily Mail. We're just too clever to find a boyfriend. It may sound insufferably smug, but these women say their high intellect means they struggle to meet someone. For Natasha Hooper, the most important part of pre-date preparation isn't getting her hair done, waxing her legs, or buying a new dress. Instead, she's more preoccupied with composing a list of conversational topics which she hopes will bridge the gap between her highbrow preoccupations and the more mainstream interests of her dates. Waiting in a bar for a young man a few weeks ago, she ran through possible options before settling on the topic of the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. A surefire way, the 22-year-old undergraduate reasoned, to guarantee an interesting debate. Yet while the 30-year-old office worker who sat down in front of her was handsome, polite, and smartly dressed, the minute Natasha brought up the Labour leader's policies, any spark of attraction was extinguished. When I mentioned Jeremy Corbyn, he said, "Who's that?" "I couldn't believe it," says Natasha. After 90 minutes discussing what she describes as benign subjects, such as reality TV and football, Natasha made her excuses and left, no closer to finding Mr. Right. With long dark hair, big brown eyes, and stunning size 8 figure, Natasha, entering her final year at Goldsmiths University of London, has no problem attracting male attention. The issue, she explains, is the caliber of men she attracts. I'm not claiming to be Albert Einstein, but I can't seem to meet a man I find intellectually stimulating, she says. Nor is she the only well-educated young woman who says she is too clever to find love. Indeed, she's one of the growing breed of women who fear, perhaps with good reason, they will be left on the proverbial shelf because of a shortage of educated men. Recent figures from the University Admissions Service UCAS show that 30,000 more women than men are starting their degree courses in the United Kingdom. On A-level results day last month, 133,280 British women aged 18 secured the university place compared with 103,800 men of the same age. The effects of this carry over into the workplace, where women aged from 22 to 29 typically now earn 1,111 more a year than their male peers. This growing gulf between male and female attainment, the result, many believe, of the feminization of the education system with more female teachers, less physical exercise, and an emphasis on the arts, is having troubling repercussions when it comes to relationships. A recent study found more than 90% of predominantly graduate women surveyed were delaying motherhood not to pursue careers, but because they couldn't find a suitable man. Some were so despairing they were considering freezing their eggs as an insurance policy. But simply, it is an oversupply of educated females. In China, they're called leftover women. It sounds cold and callous, but in a demographic terms, it's true. There are not enough graduates for them, says the study's author, Marcia Inhorn, professor of anthropology at Yale University. We covered this study a few weeks ago. The upshot, frustrated young women terrified of being left single and childless, and men driven by a sense of inadequacy. Men may claim to want educated women, but don't know how to deal with those they meet, and some say they're intimidated by me, says Natasha, who grew up in Birmingham and is single after breaking up with her boyfriend this year. I feel I'm hitting a brick wall. Great. Like many arts degrees, her media and communications course is dominated by female students, and Natasha claims that few male undergraduates lack the intellectual maturity to handle conversations. I'm sorry, you're studying media and communications. That's not really educated. Just saying. Anyway, quote, one canceled our date 4 times because he was too busy getting drunk. That shows how interesting you are, honey. In class, their conversations center around going to gigs and smoking weed at weekends, which is not what I'm looking for in a date. Well, I can agree with them. Weed is far more interesting than you are. She prefers instead to date older men she meets through her part-time job as a nightclub promoter. Yet even more mature men fail to show the requisite enthusiasm for her university projects, which include a radio documentary she recently produced on the, quote, pressure that black women are under to adhere to white beauty stereotypes. One can imagine how such a topic could be a little alienating to many men, and Natasha herself admits there's only so much I can talk about my own interests without sounding patronizing. British women began to catch up with men's educational attainment levels in the 60s when larger numbers entered universities, but only recently have the roles been dramatically reversed, with men falling behind at an alarming rate. In the 60s, there was a gendered way of pushing female graduates into jobs such as teaching and nursing, says Nietzsche Hodgson, author of The Curious History of Dating from Jane Austen to Tinder. And only 20 or 30 years ago, a man wanted his female partner to be smart because the assumption was that she would be the primary carer, staying at home to raise their children, who would then absorb her intellect. But now women are competing with men for the same careers. There are more female junior doctors than male, for example, while nearly 2/3 of practicing lawyers in Scotland, though under 40, are women. Their achievements have become more problematic. Smart women raise the issue of why would take some time off when they have children, says Hodgson. After all, why should a female partner stop working if she studied hard for her career? The reality is that with women getting more and better degrees, in the next 10 years to 20 years, women will be smarter than men in terms of how well they're educated. And I don't think men are ready for this. This is no surprise to Becca Porter, who graduated last year from Manchester University with a joint honors degree in history and sociology and is now starting a master's in disability studies at Leeds University. The sense, the sense of achievement I derive from learning seems alien to most men. Yes, you're doing disability studies. That's alien to most normal humans, actually. But anyway, Becca is 23. At school, I wasn't bothered about boys, but I'm at the stage where I'd like to share my life with someone. With a working class upbringing, Becca's mother is an activities coordinator and her father an engineer. Becca was not only the first in her family to go to university, but an anomaly among her male peers in Burnley, Lancashire. Among those from poor backgrounds, the gender divide is highly pronounced, with young women who are on free school meals 51% more likely to go into higher education than men in similar circumstances. The boys at my school mostly went into manual jobs after we left and seemed to think I had a high opinion of myself for going to university, says Becca. They say I'm too bright for them. Becca recalls a factory worker she asked out in a bar while home for the holidays, turning her down because she was too clever for him. We were having a great chat until he found out I was at university, says Becca. I insisted I wasn't too clever for him, and he agreed to go on a shopping trip together for our first date. But it was awful. I think he felt I should lead the conversation, so he barely spoke, and I felt too awkward to say anything. Her longest relationship was with a car mechanic from Burnley last year. It lasted a few weeks. He thought I viewed myself as a big shoot, says Becca, who admits she found him monosyllabic. So you did view yourself as big shit, didn't you? Anyway, skipping a bit more, he didn't understand that my degree meant that I had a head full of information, and when I asked him about his work, all he could muster was that it had been fine. In any case, there's only so much you can talk about when you do the same job every day. In the event, Becca ended the relationship because she said he was always at work, an unfortunate fact of life many of us might sympathize with, but one Becca intends to put off for much of her 20s by doing a PhD in disability research after her master's. She has dated around 8 men in total, all non-graduates. I know deep down they didn't see me as relatable, she says. I get an impression they'd rather date a girl without a degree. They don't know how to react to my different life experiences and see my education as a barrier. So why doesn't Becca date fellow students? Because she says of the class divide. The few boys I met at the university came from middle-class families in which a degree was expected of them, she explains. They weren't generally interested in their studies, whereas my degree was a big deal. I was there to learn. She acknowledges some of her degree subjects were a bit out there. They included gender and sexuality in Africa and reproduction in new medical technology, but adds it was hurtful that men didn't want to talk about them. Here's a rule of thumb. Nobody cares about gender and sexuality in Africa. Nobody. Ever.
Not even Africans.
Not even Africans. Yeah, definitely not Africans. No African worth his salt. From the poorest African to the richest African, no one cares about gender and sexuality in Africa. It's just that simple. Well, okay, maybe the 1,000 idiots who study at the Johannesburg University, those that were protesting science. Okay, maybe those care. But, the rest of the 1.1 billion people that live in Africa, they don't give a shit. Back to the article. One date found the fact that I studied from a feminist perspective off-putting. Most mistakenly assume I hate men. Good. Good. That's a very good rule of thumb. You see a feminist, she probably hates men. Anyway, going further, many believe the growing number of casualties from the intellectual chasm will be educated women in their 30s and 40s who fail to find men they deem their equal and are running out of time to start a family. Andrea Gould, 41, from a Frighton-on-Sea, Essex, has 2 degrees and says her intellect has prevented her from finding love and having the family she longed for. Being an A-grade student has been an obstacle as much as a blessing. It has limited my choices in men, she says. During both her degrees, she first studied English and German at Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge, then social policy at the same university for an extra challenge. She claims male students fell into 2 camps. There were the geeky types into computer games and leery lads who just wanted to drink and were intimidated by my studious nature, she recalls. I didn't want to be around either. No worry, honey, they didn't want to be around you either. Throughout her 20s and 30s, Andrea, who worked as a foreign languages teacher before setting up an online furniture store, struggled to find anyone suitable. Her longest relationship for 2 years was in her mid-30s with a musician. It ended because she disapproves of his use of cannabis. Well, I'm sorry, but with an insufferable bitch like you, I would start smoking weed regularly too. Just saying. Anyway, since then I've used online dating and tried to date only those who specified a similar level of education on their profile, she says. But we had nothing in common. Men think I'm too serious. I want to talk about psychology and literature. They're obsessed with UFOs and Harry Potter. Perhaps I'm too fussy, but I'm bored within an hour. Dr. Ellie Bogg, a social psychologist at Birmingham City University, says more women graduate with the expectation of being challenged by a conversation in a romantic context as well as in their careers. This in turn can be intimidating for men who feel often belittled by women who've outgrown them. For her part, Andrea insists that scintillating conversation isn't too much to ask for. I'm not after a man with money or a high powered career. Of course you aren't. Just someone to have an intellectual conversation with. Right. But I'm running out of time to start a family. That gives me a sense of emptiness, and I couldn't be happier to hear that. The solution, perhaps, for Andrea and the growing number of women in her situation could be to master the art of compromise. After all, as Dr. Bogg puts it, quote, a degree might make you think differently, but it doesn't make you a better person. As women continue to excel, many might be better off exercising a bit more humility.
You think?
the the reason I didn't cut more liberally from this article is just because it's so good. I mean, call me a masochist or a sociopath or whatever. I don't care. I just feel good when I read about these women's misery. I really do. I really feel good because 10 years ago, actually more than 10 years ago, in 2006, 11 and a half years ago, in early 2006, I wrote an article for members only magazine in Romania, and I said reality is gonna hit you in the face. That was the time when it became very fashionable, even in Eastern Europe, to go to do these kinds of completely useless bollocks degrees that end in studies, And I said at the time, reality is gonna hit you in the face, and I'm gonna be there laughing. It wasn't a very well received article because everyone thought that I was a bit too harsh, but nowadays people who have actually read that article, now they're like, oh my god, that guy had a point. Because you study sociology and gender and sexuality in Africa. How is that going to land you a decent job? How does that? I don't even think that makes you educated. I mean, I can learn about that from the internet within one day. Why do I need a degree in it?
Yeah, I mean, every single woman in that article had a BS degree. And I'm not talking about Bachelor of Science here.
No,
I'm talking about
no.
the other BS.
Yeah, true.
I mean, there isn't one woman here in this article who has this sort of problem that studies, I don't know, medicine or law or sort of engineering or any sort of like normal subject where you can actually get a reasonable job with that.
Mm-hmm. Or a subject that after you master, you can definitely say you're educated in some way. Because again,
I mean, if you study something like history, it's not particularly good in terms of career prospects, but at least you're going to be educated as a historian. At least you're going to have some sort of like more or less useful knowledge. Whereas if you study gender and sexuality in Africa, like who gives a shit?
Yeah. All of them have BS degrees. All of them are incredibly narcissistic with a very high self-esteem, which is, by the way, a bad thing. It's just not a good thing. Self-esteem is bad, especially in these kinds of situations. None of them understand the notion of humility, and all of them just seem to think seem to be very bland. I mean, it's like talking with the Guardian contributors, basically. And for the people who don't know the United Kingdom, and especially people who've never been to the United Kingdom and just read the media, this might come as a shock to you, but the overwhelming majority of British people are just not like the contributors on the Guardian. They're just not. It's just not how the way it works. It's usually, by the way, the same thing is true for the highly bigoted contributors that you see sometimes in the comment sections of the Daily Mail. Most of the British people are not like that either. No, most of the British people are just like most of the normal people in almost everywhere in Europe. They're like remarkably commonsensical. And as a result, when these kinds of women try their luck in the dating scene, well, they're going to try their luck on the same market pool available of men they're forming, the majority of the British men. And the majority of the British men are not the Guardian contributors, neither in mentality nor in actual job. They're just not. And how I'm so educated because I'm finishing up a media and communications degree. Yeah, that makes you a nobody. In the eye of the overwhelming majority of normal men, that's not unimpressive, completely unimpressive. That may be impressive, for your parents or for your peers of leftists who ponder in your armchairs and do a lot of armchair socialism, and you pat each other on the back. That may be impressive, but over there in the real world, it just isn't.
Yeah. Also, it seems like a lot of these women were viewing dates as more sort of as more of a debate than as a sort of relaxed conversation.
Mhm.
As it's not normal to compile a list of a list of questions and topics that you want to bring up at the conversation and talk about. I know the psychological literature of some sort of topic, or to talk about um,
Jeremy Corbyn, are you kidding me?
Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know whether the individual that she asked about Jeremy Corbyn, her date, I don't know if that individual, they said that was a manager in his 30s at some corporation. I don't think that guy actually didn't know who Jeremy Corbyn was. It could very well be the case that he was just, who's that? And probably the next question is, why the hell do we even have to talk about that loon? I don't think he didn't know who Jeremy Corbyn was. But if that was the case, that's even better, because it shows that most people really don't care about that politics that much. Most people don't live in politics. I mean,
Yeah,
I do live in politics because I make half of my living off of that, but most people are not like that.
I mean, having a political discussion as the primary topic of your first date is just not something that a lot of men or women will find attractive.
Yeah, definitely not.
I mean,
Definitely.
I would find that sort of conversation interesting, but most men don't, and most women don't, and probably you'll find more men than women who would be interested in the discussion about Jeremy Corbyn, but still it's probably going to be a small percentage of either sex.
Yeah, yeah. And again, having that topic prepared beforehand during the date, that's really abnormal. Because, when I used to date, sure, I would never say no to a discussion about politics because, well, that's what I do. But, if the topic came up, I mean, to have that prepared beforehand in a list, holy shit, that would have definitely be a put off for me. I'm like, no, sorry, honey. I think you got the wrong guy. Goodbye. I'm just get the fuck out of there. You're kidding me.
It's something like, "Hi, nice to meet you. So, what is your opinion about the Congress of Vienna of 1815?
Yeah.
What is your stance on Metternich's policies?"
Yeah, it's just weird. Not that I don't know the topic, but it's just weird. I mean, the first instinct is to just get the fuck out of there. Because usually, if someone is so controlling with these kinds of things, that means that it's something wrong with that someone in general. And the way these women speak, there's definitely many things wrong with them. The advice at the end is okay, master the art of compromise and exercise a bit more humility. But in their case, it doesn't have to be a bit more humility. It should be several hundreds of tons of humility, because they're lacking any of it. I mean, 5-year-olds, narcissistic 5-year-olds have a bit more humility than these women. The way they speak, the way they express themselves is just, wow, really? And you're surprised no one wants to date you? Wow. I mean, it's such a total lack of self-awareness. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Boswick. It's just, again, I love the article because I love drinking their tears. The way they complain, and in a way they do have a point, because if they don't drop this, and I hate to use this word because it's a leftist word, but if they don't drop this classist bullshit, many of them will end up childless and with 40 kittens in their 50s. It's just the way it is. Because men will not change en masse to adapt to these over entitled bitches, especially now when traveling is easy. And you know, when you meet these kinds of ladies, you realize why there are so many men who are considering, well, how much would it cost to fly over to Ukraine or to fly over to Thailand or to fly over. I'm starting to understand them why they consider this, because you know it's not really that expensive, and you can go suddenly into a place where you don't stumble upon these bitches. It's wow, wow. It's I don't know how to describe it, but it's, in a way, if they don't adapt to reality very fast, basically they will end up lonely, which I don't think it's a bad thing in the end. I mean, it's just evolution of taking its course, selecting for the ladies who are willing to exercise humility and compromise and decency, and against you know individuals who could be basically described as basic bitch.
Yeah, and I mean, this article is sort of an sort of part of the evidence for that hypergamy does not necessarily operate on money.
Oh yeah, no.
It's not so much about that women want to have or to date or marry a man who has more money than them. It's really more about social status and class.
Yeah,
So
if you can project status and power, that's enough.
yeah, so if you're some sort of gender studies, some sort of gender studies degrees, you probably make a lot less money than a plumber. But
Sure.
the social studies woman is probably not going to want to marry a plumber, because he has he's sort of lower class, is less status, because it's sort of a blue collar job, and even though gender studies is a BS degree, it's still a degree, and therefore at least nominally higher status. So these women with these BS degrees, they're sort of in a bind that they. I mean, when this woman says that that she is not necessarily looking for someone with a lot of money and a high-powered career, I actually sort of believe her. It's not so much about the money; it's more about someone who has high social status, and that's why dating a car mechanic is not particularly scintillating, because even though the car mechanic probably makes pretty good money, it's not a high status job.
Yeah, and on the reverse, on the other side of the aisle, I really do understand it. I mean, I don't know how much experience you do have, but I grew up amongst working class men, and working class men tend to have. I don't know if it's innate, but it sort of does seem to be innate. You know, an anti-bullshit nose. They can smell bullshit from a 10-mile distance radius, and they're like, "Yeah, no, not that individual." Uh, it's neither hatred nor ignorance. It's basically disdain, I guess, for individuals who speak pompous, who like the smell of their own farts, and they speak with so much self-importance, in which these women are all in that category. And working class men don't like that. Working class men don't like it when you patronize them, especially if they deem that you're not worthy of patronizing them. And these ladies definitely are not worthy of patronizing working class men, because, as you said, working class men probably make more money than they do, and probably have more life experience than they do, and they're probably better off. They will be better off in the future than they are.
Yeah, and I mean, it would be one thing if she was, say, a doctor or something like that. Then a working class man would maybe
But at least respect it. Yeah.
they would respect her, even though they may not understand what she's talking about if she's using medical terminology and so on. But they would sort of, I mean, they realize that medicine is a real thing, and that it's useful and necessary and important. So they would give some sort of deference to someone like that. But if it's some sort of gender worker, like
Yeah.
they might not be able to like intellectually articulate why all that is bullshit. But
Their
I think
spider
most
sense
people
is
have,
mostly,
yeah,
yeah,
most people have a sort of a good instinct for that.
yeah, basically. Right. With the last one, I mean, I would love to spend another 10 minutes just to drink these people's tears, but we have one last element on the piece of news, and it's just hilarious. Uh, Go ahead.
Coming from the New York Post, but it's about Sweden. Outraged woman crusades against dog park patriarchy. Bitches, please. A Stockholm resident wants to build a new dog park with one rule: no dog boys allowed. In the Swedish capital, it's socially verboten for female dogs in heat to frolic in dog parks, according to local news outlet Stockholm Direkt. The Pujas aren't petitioned without cause. It's a widely held opinion that female dogs in heat shouldn't be in close quarters with unneutered male dogs who may get riled up from the interaction. But artist Carola Kastman, owner of a 5-month-old border collie Dober Rottweiler mix Coco, thinks it's downright discriminatory that pups like hers are barred from Stockholm's dog runs for the roughly 3 months per year they are menstruating. I could never have believed that patriarchy had entered the dog parks, she tells Stockholm Direct. This is a major political issue. I will not be happy until there's at least one sex-separated dog run for female dogs in every neighborhood. Her citizens' proposal to open a female-only dog park near her neighborhood of Sondermalm will be considered by the local government, although a chairman of Sondermalm's district council declined to comment to Stockholm Direct, quote, because he is not a dog owner himself.
You know you're full bananas when the authorities in Södermalm don't want to comment on your feminist nonsense. Anyway, go ahead, please.
A reaction to Kastman's campaign, first publicized Wednesday, has been positively rabid. A rep from the Swedish Kennel Club told the paper that building female-only dog runs was unnecessary. He also denied accusations of discrimination. It's about animals, not humans. Emily Draper, a local breeder, doggy daycare worker, and rock DJ, opined to the paper that Kastman's idea is good in theory but not practice. I'm afraid there would be total chaos, she writes, explaining that female dogs in heat may fight aggressively with each other. On Wednesday, Kastman wrote on a personal blog that she feels she's the target of a witch hunt. The following day, she penned an opinion piece on another site, News 24, Nyheter 24, defending her position. Right now, there are many frustrated dogs in the streets of the city who just want to play with their friends, Kastman writes. In Greater Stockholm, there were a total of about 110,467 dogs in 2015. Half of these may be without play for 2 months a year. It's a big question why it's the females who are banned and not the male dogs when they are the troublemaking ones. She also offered to personally take care of the operation of a female-only dog run. In an email to the Post, Kastman observes that this canine conundrum runs contrary to Sweden's typically progressive policies. The country, she says, is at the forefront of a gender-neutral policy and animal rights. It's incredible there are not any such places, and Sweden should be a role model. Kastman points to a video she posted on Instagram of Coco getting harassed at the dog run earlier this month. Kastman is ready to fight for a dog run where Coco, who has her own Instagram account, and other female dogs can find peace and quiet, she adds. Even when they do not have their periods, the males are on them all the time. I will continue to question this invisible rule where the males have the power, she wrote for News 24. It is very interesting and scary that the gender roles in society are reflected in the cultural animal world. It's time for a change.
When I saw this piece of news in Stockholm Direct, I thought it was satire. But then I investigated a bit more and noticed that it wasn't satire. So I saved up the link and said, next time we're doing a show, I'm going to translate that original piece. Thank goodness New York Post did it for me, so I didn't have to do it. Södermalm, I made a video from there. It's up on my channel. It's called Sweden's Largest Safe Space. That's the name of the video. And Södermalm is that large safe space. It's literally on an island, completely segregated from the rest of the city. And it's the place where the feminist initiative gets 40% and at the polls. And the Swedish Communist Party gets 35 to 40%. So yeah, it's that kind of place. It is full of vegan bars everywhere. I mean, it's... if Tumblr had been reality, it would look like the Södermalm Island. It's just really that simple. And it's the kind of place that you can't believe it's real, even as you're walking through the streets of Södermalm. You're wondering, this can't be real. I mean, come on, this has to be a joke, right? And then you realize it's not. And this is very common there, but again, this one with dog patriarchy is so out there that even the leftists in Södermalm are like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. I mean, I've been reading on the forums. There is a forum which, unsurprisingly, is not hosted in Sweden because it would be illegal. It's called flashback.us, hosted in the United States, where Swedes, it's one of the few places where you see the random Swedish person getting in there and speaking uncensored because it's anonymous. It's entirely in Swedish. And there was a thread about this thing. And there were two guys who were lifelong voters of the Swedish Communist Party, and even those one and living in Södermalm, and even those ones were like, come on, this can't be true. I mean, come on, the right must be making fun of us. They created a fake news to poke fun at us, and then the same guys came back 2 days later and they're like, holy shit, I actually met this lady. No, the news is real. This can't be true. So yeah, this shows you what having a good life for too long that does to you. I mean, it's really that simple. The reason these kinds of things not only come from Sweden, but they come from that place in Sweden. They come specifically from Södermalm. You don't see this coming from, let's say, from Malmö, which is also a very prosperous city. But Malmö has more serious problems like the weekly grenade attacks, too many rapes, honor killing, basic theft, sometimes pollution. Things that are you kind of sort of expect, maybe not the grenade attacks, but all the others are relatively common in a big city. But in Södermalm, things have been so good and so calm and so prosperous and so peaceful for so many decades that they simply have forgotten. They simply ran out of things to complain about. And instead of saying, oh, look, we finally at least created this small space that is fantastic, instead of enjoying that, they can't stop. And now they have to come up with this disdainful bullshit like this.
Yeah, I really like how Emily Draper frames her criticism that it's good in theory but not in practice, and I'm afraid there would be total chaos as the female dogs in heat fight with each other. That is really sort of symptomatic of how much people have to tread on eggshells there. You can't just say this is ludicrous and a stupid idea, but no, it's good in theory. But no, it's not good in theory. You just explain the theory why it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
If you would say it's, I mean, nothing is good in theory and bad in practice, because if that's the case, then your theory is wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be one thing to say that, my theory predicts that it's good, but then I run the experiment and find that it's not actually good, and so I have to go back to the drawing board. Then you might be able to use that phrase, but here she just uses theory to show that it's not a good idea.
Yeah. But again, the reason I'm mentioning that it is specifically an issue of Södermalm is because, as insane as Swedish politics are, nobody's really that insane. I mean, it has to be from that area. Hanif Bali, which is a guy I really like, he's a member of the Swedish parliament. He's of Iranian descent, and he's with the conservatives, of course. He tweeted out, "Is like this is retarded." And as usual, they accused him of being a Nazi because we all know that Iranians tend to be Nazis for some reason and white supremacists. And the guy isn't even white, but who cares?
Actually, the Iranians were sort of allied with the Nazis, and
sure. The Mufti of Iran was, but the most of the populace, I don't know. It's an open question. But then again, calling him a white supremacist is really out there. Anyway, the thing is that even people who lived very close to the area but not inside the safe space were like, come on, this has to be a joke. I mean, really? Is it really the biggest problem? Or even in the top 10? Definitely not. And this is probably the final argument that I'm going to make. It's it gives credence to the argument that good times create very, very weak people. Because I cannot imagine something like this coming up in Spain, for instance, which is also a place that has its establishment dominated by feminists who believe all sorts of nonsense about human sexuality and about animal sexuality and whatnot. But I couldn't imagine something like this coming up in Spain, let alone in very, very poor places like, I don't know, Rwanda or the Democratic Republic of Congo. You have to be at a certain level of affordability, a certain level of wealth to even begin to have the time to think and concoct something like this. It's just it gives a lot of credence that living too well for too much for too much time, it does tend to create these kinds of people, and I don't think there is a solution to this.
Yeah, maybe they should just create a movement called bitchism, which promotes the rights of female dogs.
Don't give them ideas.
Maybe they should do that.
Yeah, next time I'm in Sweden, I'm going to Södermalm and ask them about it. I mean, what's the worst that they could do? Call the police? I'll say that I'll say that they're racists and I feel patriarchally oppressed because I identify as an attack helicopter. Yeah. Anyway, with all of that being said, next week I will not be here because I'm going to investigate two separate stories in Ukraine. One of them is of interest for an international audience. I'm investigating a potential libertarian political party in Ukraine, and one of them is not that important for an international audience. I'm going to investigate their recent law about the rights of ethnic minorities in the country. But anyway, I'm going to investigate two stories, and I'm leaving on that morning next Friday. And 2 Fridays from now, I don't know where I'll be. I'll have to let you guys know via email if I'll be around here or not. I really don't know at this moment. So yeah, this has been an immensely crowded period for me. So the shows have been rare, but at the very least, if the longer the wait, the better the show, I guess. So there are some positive trade-offs for that. So with that, I think Jon has a few more things to say.
All right, I would invite you to come visit my blog, which is at orthogonalideas.com. For example, recently I've written something about the election. Also, continue my review of Thomas Sowell's book Black Rednecks and White Liberals, reviewing the chapters about middleman minorities and about slavery. So that's, I think, pretty interesting. You can check that out at orthogonalideas.com. And then we'll see you in 2 weeks or possibly more. Until then, take the red pill.
Take the red pill. Goodbye, everyone.